Coming to you from Portland, Oregon, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. ELGL engages the brightest minds in local government. I'm Kirsten Wyatt, a fellow at the Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University, building a new peer learning network called the Digital Service Network, and I'm also the ELGL co-founder. Today, I am joined by Adrian Segura, the Chief Family and Community Engagement Officer with Chicago Public Schools, Kathleen Carlson, the Leader of Special Projects with Bloomberg Philanthropies and Associates, Ruben Ocampo, the Founder of Conic Group, and Laura Biltz, the Senior Leader, also with Conic Group. Adrian, Kathleen, Laura, Ruben, welcome to GovLove.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Today, we'll talk about a new toolkit rooted in human-centered and participatory design used by the City of Chicago and Chicago Public Schools. This episode is produced in partnership with our friends at Code for America. You can sign up for the Code for America Summit in Washington, D.C. on May 16th and 17th at codeforamerica.org. Use the promo code GovLove for 10% off the ticket price. Code for America is a passionate, mission-driven team who believes government at all levels can and should work well for everyone. But first, let's get started with a lightning round. So I'm going to voice prompt our guests so everyone can get to know their voices. And first up, we have Adrian and Kathleen. I'd love for you to share your most controversial, non-political opinions. Adrian, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, so as a native son of Chicago, an unpopular, non-political, or controversial non-political opinion of mine is that Chicago deep dish is not real pizza. Bold words, I see gasps, but it's not. I can enjoy a slice every now and then, but in my opinion, it is not pizza.
Wow, that may be one of the hottest takes we've had on GovLove. So I'm going to let our listeners respond on social media to that. But Kathleen, let's see if you can top that.
Well, that's hilarious, Adrian, that was yours, because I had a different one. I had two that I was thinking about, and I'm going to go with the one that I wasn't going to say based on what you just said, which is my controversial non-political and popular opinion is that Chicago thin crust pizza is not good. It tastes like cardboard. Sorry. And I'm also a native Chicagoan. So I now have been brought over to the New York slice and it's delicious. Sorry, Dad.
Bold takes on this edition of GovLove. I mean, I feel like we're going to be talking about some incredibly innovative and creative work, but I feel like the headline might be these pizza takes. All right. So next lightning round question: what is a food that most people like but you do not? Laura, you're up first.
I have two that come to mind. The first is peanut butter. I loved it as a kid, and then one day I woke up and I hated it ever since. Not an allergy, just can't stand it. Second one, my friend told me is controversial, which is I don't like mushrooms. So that's where I'm at.
They're polarizing. Mushrooms are.
They are.
Yes. All right. And Ruben, how about you? A food that most people like but you do not?
So I grew up with a dad who worked in the food industry, and one of the things that his company made was ketchup, and I didn't care for ketchup really growing up. I'll tolerate ketchup on a hot dog or a burger, and that's about it. I don't really put ketchup on my fries, which people find surprising. And the other thing is, because I'm Latino, I think people assume that I prefer hot food, spicy food, but I'm Colombian, so I really like very bland food. And I have very low tolerance for spicy food.
When I was in Colombia, I could not find spice for the life of me. I had to request it, and then someone finally was able to just bring me like the straight habanero pepper. I was like, this is what we have. But it is not part of the cuisine. I was shocked.
Yeah.
All right, so a lightning round that's off to a great start, talking almost exclusively about food. But we are going to change gears. Last lightning round question for each of you. What was the first music purchase that you made independently, and what format was it on? And Adrian, you're up first.
Yeah, so I remember this memory vividly. It was summer of my junior year. I had just spent summer working and went to a local record shop in Chicago called Reckless Records and bought Jay-Z's Black Album, and I bought it in CD format.
All right, up next, Kathleen.
So my first independent record purchase, and I'm dating myself, was in 1980, and it was Pat Benatar, Crimes of Passion, with, of course, the hit Me With Your Best Shot. But and then I will add, I purchased it, but then I traded my brother's girlfriend who was in high school for AC/DC's Back in Black. So those were like within 2 weeks of one another, my first, and they were records, LPs.
All right, wow. So already lots of diversity in music choice here on the Gov Love podcast. Laura, you're up next. What was the first music purchase you made?
Oh gosh. So my first one was Aaron Carter's CD. I remember it had his face in front of an American flag, and it was just my first album. But mostly I listened to my sister's music in the car, so this was my one foray into buying my own music. So make of that what you will.
And listeners, just so you know, I think Adrian's head was in his hands when that response was being given. So just to give you a little bit of the perspective from this recording. Last up, Ruben, can you top Jay-Z, Pat Benatar, Aaron Carter with your first music purchase?
That is a lot to try to top. No, and actually mine is going to be controversial because I'm going to be very honest. My first independent music purchase was the album Bad by Michael Jackson in 1987. And it was also a vinyl record. So my first two music purchases were on vinyl. And then after that, I moved on to the compact disc, but that was later in the early 90s.
All right, so we've had a chance to get to know some of our guests and their food and music tastes, but we want to dive in and talk about the important work they've been doing in Chicago and with Chicago Public Schools. But first, tell us more about your career paths. How did you get to where you are today? And Adrian, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so I started my career in engagement as a community organizer about 12 years ago. Working initially on local policy here in Chicago, and then eventually state policy and then some national policy work. Learned how to organize people really, really well. And then I joined the State Charter Association to learn how to organize money. And so got involved in politics, campaigning, running an independent expenditure. Saw great success in that work. And then, my heart wasn't necessarily in the politics of the work. It was a great experience and I was able to learn a ton. But when CPS, shortly after the election cycle, I had a really great successful run. CPS was exploring this new way of engaging with stakeholders, specifically on policy. It was the current outgoing mayor's kind of philosophy that policy should be rooted in people's experiences. And CPS's engagement team wasn't designed to actually kind of build a bridge between our engagement strategy and our policy work. And that was, it really did blend a lot of my past experiences. And so having deep ties to CPS as a product of the district and working in education for the last 15 years, it really kind of came to be very quickly. And so I've been at CPS since 2019. And was introduced to design once I was here, but really I think design, in my opinion, beautifully blends like my experience in community organizing and centering people's experiences to make decisions.
Great, thanks. And for our listeners, CPS is Chicago Public Schools. And as a reminder, we're talking about this interesting partnership between the schools and the city using human-centered design. So can't wait to learn more from you. Next up is Kathleen. Tell us more about your career path.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. I have about 30 years of experience in local government and nonprofit work. Grew up in Chicago and landed a job with the city of Chicago straight out of undergrad, working for the then mayor, Mayor Daley's wife, Maggie, and really just kind of fell into government and then went on to do a bunch of different jobs in the city of Chicago, local gov, working for the building department, working in the mayor's office, and then working for the Chicago Public Library System. And so then I moved to New York and was working for a nonprofit here, the National MS Society, and Mike Bloomberg got elected mayor. And I wrote him a letter, like an old school letter, and just said, congrats on the win. If you're looking to build a team, I have a great love of public service and would love to be considered. And I knew no one, and I got a call and I interviewed and I ended up working for the Children's Services Administration, and then went on to work at City Hall, and then for the largest social service agency in the country here, which is called the Human Resources Administration. I was there for my last 5 years in government, and then also went over to the next administration. But HRA, as it's called, is a huge city agency, about 15,000 employees, and really in the business of helping low-income New Yorkers with cash assistance and food supplements and public health insurance. So that social service thread has been with me, and public service, and then came to Bloomberg Philanthropies and Associates about 8 years ago, and really just get to be kind of government adjacent now. And that just fills me with such joy because I have such just deep love and respect for public service and public servants and the really hard work that they do. So that's my story.
Great. And Laura, tell us about your career path.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, it started in undergrad. I had the privilege of joining a seminar class my freshman year, really uncertain what I wanted to do, and luckily got in this class with upperclassmen who were understanding the globalization of consumer culture, meaning we studied how businesses were making choices to better apply their products in the different markets around the globe, specifically paying attention to the cultural relationships and needs of those different places and peoples. And that was the first time I'd ever really realized that the type of design and the solution you're making will change depending on the person you're building it for, the people, the person or the group you're trying to support. So I took that, and that was my springboard into diving into how do you understand people and their needs? How do you ask really smart questions? And I studied anthropology and creative writing to that effect, and eventually found myself in the market research industry with Ipsos and helping companies understand their loyalty and their customer satisfaction scores so that they could start making smart decisions on what do we do to help improve our customers' experiences. And I found myself drawn to the question of, what do we do now that we know more about what our customers are experiencing or what our users are experiencing? How do we make a smart choice around what to build for them so that we can all be more successful together and more satisfied in what we're experiencing? And that led me to design school at IIT's Institute of Design, where I studied human-centered design methodology and mindsets, and have spent the last 5 years employing that with various industries, for-profit organizations, nonprofits, government, city of Chicago and CPS, and finding ways to help make sure that we're designing the right thing for the right people at the right time, given what they're all experiencing and what they believe to be important.
The right thing for the right people at the right time. Such a good way of talking about what we're going to dig into today. But last but not least, want to hear from Ruben about your career path.
Sure, thank you. So as I mentioned before, I'm from Colombia originally. I did my undergrad studies back home in Colombia in industrial design, which is the design of physical products. And when we were learning how to design physical products, we were really paying attention to what we call physical human factors, right? How basically the human body will interact with the physical product or the space. Like Laura, I moved to Chicago to get a master's degree in design at the IIT Institute of Design. And one of the things that the school taught me is that human factors are much more than the physical. You have to keep in mind the cognitive, the emotional, the social, and the cultural, and that totally expanded my view of what design can actually accomplish. So during the second year of that master's degree, we had to do something that was called a demo project, which is kind of like a thesis. You spend the first semester of that year focusing on your research and gathering insights around the project that you have chosen. And then the second semester, actually prototyping and over time, developing a solution, but showing the iteration through your prototypes of how that solution came about. And mine happened to be on how to engage citizens in civic debates, noticing that a lot of conversations about planning, for example, yes, they opened the doors to citizens, but citizens didn't have the knowledge. They were not equipped to have some of these conversations. So even though the intent was there, kind of like the delivery or the engagement of the facilitation of those conversations was really challenging. So I got that master's degree over 20 years ago now. So in some way, that project has come full circle to the work that I've been doing personally with Bloomberg Philanthropies for the last 5 years. So Bloomberg Philanthropies has invested a great deal of not only funding, but also effort in creating a wonderful network of cities around the world that it is equipping to innovate, to really tackle some of their complex challenges with new ways of thinking and with new tools. And it is through that connection that actually I met Kathleen and we started doing the work that we're here to talk about today.
Wonderful. And so let's talk about that work. And so share with us more about the work being done in the city of Chicago Public Schools, that you all have been working on together. And Kathleen, why don't you jump in and take this one?
Sure. And as Ruben said, I started at Bloomberg Philanthropies, as I said, about 8 years ago. And Philanthropies and Bloomberg Associates really work to, power the work of local governments, mayors in particular, and help to improve the quality of life for residents, through strategic and innovative approaches. And so Ruben and I met through that lens, and we started on the Bloomberg Associate side working with the city of Chicago in maybe about 4 years ago after the mayor was first elected. And one of the first projects that they asked us to start to consider was what were the new and different ways the Chicago Public School District and the mayor's office could more deeply engage residents and particularly bring into conversation voice of community in new and meaningful ways, as a way to lift all voices, as Laura said, to design strategies for the right purpose, the right group at the right time. And so we began to explore what could that look like. And so we kicked off this project, I'd say about 3 years ago, and was really privileged to meet Ruben and Laura and the folks at Conic, and then Adrian and all the work that he's doing to better engage community and families, leading that effort at Chicago Public Schools. So that's where we began. And I'll be honest, I think when we started, we didn't know exactly where we were headed, and nor did we decide immediately, what we want to do is build out this toolkit. We just really started talking deeply from all of our perspectives about the need for really bringing community voice into decision making at the start of a conversation rather than at the end of a conversation. Rather than government sort of saying at the end of a journey, here's what you need, community, we've designed this for you, have fun. No, let's start way at the beginning. What are you thinking, community? What's important to you? What's your life experience? What would be relevant to you? And so that's where the journey began.
And Adrian, perhaps this is a question for you. Were you trying to solve a particular problem, or was it more of an observation that those voices, to Kathleen's point, weren't being heard until the end, or they weren't being brought in at the beginning? And so, back when this work was starting, did you have a goal or an endpoint in mind, or was it more just this bigger picture value of hearing all voices, from the school district?
Yeah, so I don't think even to date, if I'm being honest, and I don't think we should have an endpoint in mind when it comes to design and when it comes to stakeholder engagement. because it's ongoing, and frankly, every community is different. Even in Chicago, right, block by block, you can see stark differences. And so I think, to Kathleen's point, a lot through discussions with different leaders, I think one thing that that Bloomberg did a fantastic job at when they were helping us kind of think about big picture, like broader kind of like how do we help CPS, how do we help the city of Chicago? They really served as a convener and brought the right people into the space to kind of, share the challenges that we were confronting in different ways. I think Chicago, much like other large urban districts across the country, is grappling with really difficult decisions. At the time, it was how do we reopen schools in a safe way that parents trust? But when you look at post-pandemic, how design can help us shape and inform decisions. Every district across the country, specifically every large urban district across the country, is struggling with enrollment challenges. In some parts, we are seeing stark declines. Major cities like Chicago, we've seen a 10-year downward trend of student population, where literally over the last 6 years, we've lost close to 60,000 students. And we have large and aging building portfolios, and that's not, Chicago is not an anomaly in that sense. When I talk to my peers in other large districts, they're grappling with similar challenges. And the question is always, if the question is rooted on, what do we do with the excess buildings? I think that it's a non-starter. But if the question is, what do we want the student experience to be, it really changes the way people think about systemic issues that plague large urban districts. And so the toolkit really kind of serves as a backdrop, and we've embedded it. And I'm getting ahead a little bit here, but really the how do we make informed decisions that are centered in people's experiences, those who are most impacted or set to benefit by a decision being made, but also those responsible for implementation, which I think sometimes, I'll tell you, when I started my career in a school, we were given our marching orders and expected to march on with little input or context. And I think that the way things are shifting, specifically in Chicago as well as other cities, people expect more from the government, and they expect to see what's under the hood. And I think that the toolkit allows us to really meaningfully engage with both internal and external stakeholders in a co-design process that leverages the foundation of trust as a necessary means to come up with solutions.
Let's talk about the toolkit and the different ways that you centered people in the design of the toolkit, and the different techniques you use to build it so it's something that can be continually used by the schools in the city. And so, Ruben and Laura, I know that you both have extensive backgrounds in human-centered design, so I'd love to hear more about the toolkit build.
Sure, thank you. I'll kick us off, and then I'll pass it over to Laura. I would say there are two fundamental things that I would call out as far as how we applied human-centered design in building the toolkit. The first one is the curation of the tools itself and the tools themselves, and how we basically assemble them as a toolkit. And then the second part was actually getting community input in how that's going to be shared with them as a self-serve tool. So I'll start with the first one, the curation of the tools. We had the good fortune of building on work that Bloomberg Philanthropies has been doing with cities in bringing this kind of methodology to cities around the world for the last few years. And I'm one of the coaches who has been doing that work. So we already had a methodology and a series of methods and tools to build on. I think the main challenge here was that those methods in that context, in the Bloomberg Philanthropies context, are intended to be delivered by a coach or a trainer. So through webinars and through live training. And here we wanted to create a toolkit that could just be put in the hands of the community. So the first challenge was, how do we take all of this content that really lives mostly in the coaches' heads, or that coaches can just kind of easily deliver by themselves, into something that we can put in the hands of people. So everything from the writing to the curation of examples that would be very education focused, to the language that we used to make sure that we don't start to sound too academic or too theoretical, but actually it's just kind of like layperson's terminology. So that was one. The second one was, okay, we have the ingredients. Let's say each one of these methods is an ingredient, but we have to put together the recipes. So one of the things that we did was go out and ask some of the leaders in communities, hey, this is the toolkit that we're building. These are the different methods. When we talk about how you can apply these methods, what are some of the challenges that come to mind that you think this methodology would be really good for? And based on that, we started creating something that we call mini plans, which are combinations of methods. So we don't tell them, hey, here's 26 ingredients, make whatever you want with them. We said, and here's how you can bake a cake, here's how you can make some cookies, and here's how you can make, I don't know, some brownies using some of those different ingredients. So that was us kind of in some way applying, practicing what we preached. And then the other piece was then getting the input from community in how they were going to receive that content. So the other way in which we wanted to make sure that we were being human-centered in our design of the toolkit was also in engaging people from the community in how they were going to be able to access that content. So we held a number of what I would call prototype testing sessions, where we would show the different components that we were working on to people from the community and just ask them, in order of priority, which of these pieces do you want to see first? Which ones do you want to be able to see all at once versus which ones would you want to expand on? Can you give us examples of parts of the Chicago Public Schools website that you like? Why do you like them versus things that you don't like? So one of the things, for example, that they said was, we know that the origin story behind some of these things that Chicago Public Schools is making available is really important, but that's not the first thing I want to read. So don't give me the whole origin story at the top of the page. So a decision that we made was, we're going to put 4 lines on the origin story at the top because that matters to CPS. And then we'll just let people click on that and go to a different page if they want to read more.
Such a powerful example of how sometimes when you're deeply invested in this work, you can have an idea about what people want, and it's completely different than when you actually ask them. So thank you for sharing that. Would love to hear more about, now that you've put in this work, developed this toolkit, gotten great feedback, really, been exemplary in being participatory. How is the toolkit being used? What are some of the ways that you're seeing it being used in the community? And I'll toss this one over to Adrian.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, there's a lot of work that went into developing this tool and a lot of really meaningful engagement with stakeholders to make sure that we got the right formula. But any one of us that's ever worked in government knows that sometimes good ideas just don't take off. You have to be diligent. You have to keep on pushing, almost serving the role, frankly, of like evangelist for the idea and like really carry the water. And, frankly, that's the opportunity that we saw was in engaged Conic and we engaged Bloomberg on, but the opportunity that we saw was, how do we get this in the hands of practitioners? How do we get this in the hands of the people that ultimately have the trust and relationships on the ground? Because me, leading our engagement strategy for, the 4th largest district, I engage with people, but my team is doing the day-to-day. So really there was a disconnect. And so what we needed to do, and we realized and pivoted quickly, was we needed to make sure that the staff that ultimately is going to be accountable for, or ultimately going to be delivering a lot of this work, has the necessary tools and understanding. And so there was a lot of staff training development that Conic helped us build into the toolkit rollout, so that we're at a place where we are today, which is we've got 4 very unique initiatives that are running at the exact same time. and they all have their own design teams that consist of internal district leadership and external partners. One example of that is our new accountability policy that's getting ready to roll out later on this year. Had a stakeholder design team that consisted of parents, teachers, union representatives, and then on the district side, policymakers, the folks that are going to be owning and responsible for it. And they worked together to develop what that new system was going to rate, how it was going to rate it. And they had to socialize it with external partners as well. We're running it right now on a project that I'm personally just really excited about in North Lawndale. North Lawndale, for the listeners who aren't familiar with Chicago, is a community that has seen significant population loss over the last decade. A community group there, the North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, has roots back to when Dr. Martin Luther King lived in North Lawndale. That group was resurrected in the early 2000s as part of a new quality of life plan that was happening and was underway in the community. There's a real energy to transform North Lawndale. And so that group, as part of their quality of life plan, developed a proposal for a brand new state-of-the-art STEAM Magnet Academy. It was a great proposal, and everyone told them how great that proposal was. And I can't tell you enough how many attaboys, they got. The problem was that every time it came to us advancing that proposal, the community was kind of met with some sort of resistance. It's not the right time. This doesn't solve for the right need. Have you thought about consolidating other schools to make this proposal happen? And the community stakeholders really felt like they were getting the runaround. Doesn't help that we also went through major transitions at CPS, where we've gone through 3 different CEOs in a matter of a year during this time block. And so in their minds, they're trying to socialize and everyone's telling them how great this is. And then the leader leaves. And now it's a whole new leadership with a whole new vision, and they're kind of feeling stuck. So early on, we were charged with saying, work with the community to help them figure out how we make this proposal happen. And we took the toolkit and said, we're going to pilot with you guys. This is a new way of doing things. We've never done it before. And I'm hoping that you trust us enough to leverage these tools to really help advance this proposal. And I'll tell you, it was messy. I mean, it was, when I tell you, and Ruben was part of those early conversations, but there were so many trust gaps that existed where we couldn't even have the same conversation about what do we want to be true for our community, because it was a mistrust. And okay, today it's going to be you, Adrian, and then you're going to leave, and then there's going to be somebody else, and then they're going to leave, and then we're going to be stuck here in North Lawndale still with no school to point to for our constituents, for our families. And so it took real commitment, and both from the CEO, but also from the team that was going to be carrying this work. So in North Lawndale, just to make a long story short, we started with the trust and healing modules, and we started with just share your experience with us. Help us understand what you've gone through. In that process, what are things that have gone well? What are things that have gone bad? Just be honest with us. And then what are the things that we have a shared hope and aspiration for? And that's where we spent a bulk of our time, right? It was important to acknowledge the harm that was done. It was great to know that, we had done one thing right. But on the, what are we jointly, what is our joint aspiration? That was blue ocean, right? That was let's explore that further. And so where we're at today, a year-long process with the community, it was fully driven by the community, supported by the district. 3 schools have been selected to become a STEM hub in North Lawndale. Collectively, it's going to be a $30 to $50 million capital investment that's going to go towards improving the facilities so that kids have access to world-class facilities and they can see themselves in these spaces. And really, it's investing in the community. And then they're also going to get an academic investment, meaning that they're going to have a new programmatic focus with professional development. And what we're building right now, as we bring on new partners, expanding the design team, what we're bringing on now is really continuity of programming. So 2 elementary schools feeding into a high school model that's going to feed into a collegiate model, so early college STEM. And so really what started as a proposal that was meeting resistance at the district level has turned into a completely, we flipped it on its head. It's an asset-based approach, taking a deep look at what already exists and how can we be responsive to you, but also establish clear guardrails and leverage design as the means where we can co-design with you. That's one that I get really passionate about it. I'm personally excited about it. But it's been, if you ask these folks, their quality of life plan was done in 2015. And they've been socializing this proposal with different CEOs, with different boards, with different mayors, frankly, for the last 8 years. And so that's one that I think, the proposal shifted in such a way when we took a design approach, because that's where we were able to align interests from an organizer's perspective. You align interests and you establish clear guardrails and you set parameters. And so I'm really excited about where we're heading with this. It's going to be embedded in our district strategic plan going forward. The toolkit is now fully embedded in how we operationalize making decisions as a district. And it's no longer just an engagement thing. If you're talking to diverse learners and how we're going to set up diverse learner supports, they have a design toolkit that they're taking our design toolkit and embedding it as part of how they move forward. I know Conic has partnered with other departments within CPS as well to help them go deep in design structures so that they can build systems that are responsive to the needs of those that those services are intended to serve.
You alluded to this in your response, but about this kind of shift to building out really strong design teams that are comprised of internal and external folks. Talk to us about that. What are some of the best practices that you learned? And especially just given that you're not just serving your own staff and their work, but then populations, including students and then their families and then the community. So what are some of those best practices that you would advise or recommend for strong design teams?
You need buy-in from the top. At the end of the day, we have teams that are going to be implementing a lot of the work, but if their leaders don't believe in it, if they're not committed in it, or committed to the process, the project or the design structure is doomed to fail or just be met with more resistance than needed. And so you really do need leadership buy-in across all levels. And so I think that that's first and foremost, a key. With that in mind, I also think clearly articulating to people in advance what the process can look like. It's not linear by any means. And I'll give you back to the North Lawndale example. There were some times where we started to go towards, we went from divergent thinking to emergent thinking and started to generate ideas and themes. And then I said something that was triggering. And then guess what? We're back to trust and healing because I said something that sparked conversation and made people feel like, oh, you're doing things the way you used to. And so it's a culture change. And it has to be, as leaders, we have to be, as leaders in government who are called to service, we have to be willing to put ego aside and listen. And in that process, I think one of my like realizations and aha moments was, I'm in this space and that's great. I need my peers in this space. They got to see this for themselves, because until they start to see it in their minds, it's gonna feel scary. Like, what do you mean I have to go and talk to a parent about, changing this policy? Like, that's not how we do it. And so really it's a culture shift. And it's like, you will get a stronger policy recommendation if you start with the people that the policy is intended to serve. And it's been a shift that I think we're seeing real buy-in from other cabinet members. We have invited them to serve in different design team structures so that they can, seeing is believing. And so I think those small proof points I would recommend folks in my role across the country, if you're listening, or in roles similar to mine, like bring people in early on so that they can see themselves in the space. You talking about it, you sharing best practices, that's great. But until you see yourself in that space, it's going to be really hard for you to imagine or even start to imagine, what can I do in my own shop? And we did a lot of that early on And I think having early buy-in was critical to the success of the program that we've seen to date.
And might I recommend sharing this episode with your boss that has not yet bought into human-centered design. We'll just put that plug in for all of us. Laura, I think you have some things to add on this idea of best practices for strong design teams and getting leadership buy-in.
Yeah, I do. I wanted to bring up 3 other key points, I think, that have helped, that come from our methodology and toolkit, that have helped build what Adrian's been describing. And the first one I'll point to is the notion of making conversations visual. Adrian talked about the conversation he had with North Lawndale team, identifying what went well, what didn't, and what are ideas for ways we can, opportunities to make this better together. And we captured that live on a digital whiteboard using a tool that available online. And that codified and solidified the fact that we are hearing what you're saying. We're capturing your words on the screen. We all get to see them, acknowledge them, refer back to them throughout the duration of the project. And that becomes part of the history of our working team. In that context, served as a way to reinforce the fact that we are listening to what's being said, and we want this to be available for all of us. We're starting at the basics of how can we make our feelings transparent? How can we start to cultivate that back and forth of we're listening, we're sharing, we're reacting together to solve this problem as one team. And that discipline holds through in all of the meetings. We always use that virtual whiteboard. We always captured what was being said in the words of those that were saying it, and then would help synthesize and make sense of it through the emergent thinking moving forward. So that was a huge practice to how do we make the design team successful and build the momentum needed. The second thing I wanted to mention is that we also just needed to get the basics right of building communication principles that were consistent and reinforced time and time again. Specifically, we started to share the agenda in advance of the meeting. We sent reminders, hey, the meeting is today at 11 a.m. We sent recaps that highlighted key discussion elements, links to the resources that were discussed, and summary of who's doing what by when. Now, these are all things that are probably not unheard of for the listeners, but it is an active discipline to make sure those go out timely and that they're thorough or mindful of the particular audiences receiving these emails and or video recordings if you're into that kind of way of sharing information. So that's the second thing, is just get the basics right of being reliable with the communication and transparency of materials. And the third thing I just wanted to highlight is that we also got into a rhythm of building the agendas together. So we would talk about what we thought would make sense for next steps. We'd listen to what the other constituents and residents would believe would be important to discuss. There were times where we shifted our agenda by a couple weeks to make sure we made time for them to bring in information they needed to share with us so that we understood where they were coming from in the right times. So making sure that the agenda wasn't dictated by anyone in particular on the design team. We were the shepherds of the process, but not the ones creating it all on our own. And that, I think those 3 things, if you can get those right, your design teams will have a foundation they'll have the foundation needed to just start working together as one and starting to build the trust that hey, you're going to do what you say you're going to do, which is critical in these kinds of stakeholder engagement opportunities.
I'd love to hear some more ways that our listeners who currently are working in an organization where perhaps these ideas around human-centered or participatory design haven't caught on yet. How can somebody put some of these ideas into motion in their own organization? Do they have to be a designer or a trained expert in human-centered design? And what are some of the tips or recommendations that you might give to somebody who's interested in developing their own version of the toolkit?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll start by saying, no, you don't have to be a trained designer. I think it starts with mindsets and a few disciplines. So mindsets are things like optimism, the belief that you can really make a difference and change what is in front of you. Curiosity, the desire to go out and learn and not assume that you have all the answers in front of you. And then the discipline to start doing some of those things. For example, not assuming that you already have an understanding of the experience of people that are dealing with a problem that you're trying to solve for, but actually go out and talk to those people, and don't give up in your efforts to find them. So I think a lot of these tools are meant to be things that you can grab and put into practice, as long as you're willing to do that. Now, as far as if you want to get trained more formally in those, there are some programs that are available online. One that comes to mind is Acumen, who offers a program that was developed in partnership with IDEO. And as far as I understand, it's for free. You can sign up and volunteer your time to work on a project as you're getting trained on it. We at Conic are in the process, so this is kind of an early announcement, but this year we are looking to launch an open enrollment program that would allow people in the civic sector to actually sign up for it and get trained in some of the basics of how to apply human-centered design in their own space as well. And finally, I'll remind us that the toolkit that was built for Chicago Public Schools is available online. So we can also share that link, and our friends at Chicago Public Schools are constantly passing that link around to people in other school districts, in other cities, so that they can also just go and refer to it themselves.
Would love to hear more about what's next for the toolkit. How is it going to continue to be used in 2023 and beyond?
I'm happy to start off on that front. And, first just want to thank both Ruben and Laura, who are currently leading additional professional development for my staff. And we've done some training for cabinet members. So Chicago Public Schools is embarking on a new strategic plan. We're coming up on the tail end of a strategic plan that was developed in 2019 that called out some really great kind of like aspirational pieces just around like what we want to be true for kids. And then the pandemic came, and it really exposed even more kind of issues across the board. We've got real challenges that lie ahead, and the most sustainable way for us to be able to solve for some of these challenges is with people. And so I think first and foremost, that's kind of the toolkit is embedded in that new strategic plan and where we're heading as a district, and will really serve as how we solve for some of our more complex challenges. The what's will change, the why it's the right thing will change, but the how is going to be the toolkit. And the reason why we've invested so much time in partnering with Conic to really support training and development for the team of practitioners is so that when we're ready to go this summer, foundationally, people know how to access it. They know how to simplify it. I will say, going back to your first question around like design is all around us, right? Like, how many times have you pushed a door that's supposed to be pulled, but the rail is just set up in a way where it looks like you're supposed to push it, right? And so there are design flaws that can be annoying, but when design is right, when you get the right design, you can tell, right? It's like making that perfect cup of Nespresso, right? It's like design in such a way where you can just, it's intended to do the function, and they thought about the experience. Government should be no different. I think sometimes we leave so many things up to chance. We leave so many things up to politics. The reality is, if we can crack the code in policy making and decision making and investment strategies, and we can leverage human-centered design as a foundation for that work, then our products would just make more sense for the people that they're intended to serve. And so that's been my philosophy. And so it's going to be for Chicago Public Schools. The toolkit is an open source tool. It is on our website, free for everyone and anyone to use. And from our end, we will be using it as part of our strategic blueprint that's going to kick off later on this summer.
I love the perfect cup of Nespresso can be found in this toolkit. Again, show notes will include that link to this free open source toolkit, so you can check it out and hopefully put some of the tactics into play in your own community. Would love to end this episode with our traditional question. And since there's 4 of you, we're going to hear from each of you, and we'll see which song ends up getting selected. But the question is, if you could be the God Love DJ, what song would you pick as our exit music for this episode? So we'll go reverse order. I know Adrian's been kicking us off, but why don't we'll start with Ruben on this one. What is your exit music song choice for this episode?
I think given the topic of today, it has to be We Built This City.
Good one. Good one. All right, Laura, you're next.
I'm a Believer is the only one coming up for me right now because it just gets me so pumped up.
Love it. Love to hear it. Kathleen.
Human by the Killers.
All right. Another good one. Our producer's going to have a tough choice. All right, Ruben, bring us home.
Adrian?
Oh, sorry, Adrian. Yes.
I'm going to stay on the hip hop thread and say It Ain't Hard to Tell by Nas.
All right. So our producers will be selecting one of those songs to close out today's episode. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and sharing the great work that you're doing, and most of all for sharing this free toolkit that anybody could access from the CPS website. So thank you for coming on GovLove today.
Thank you for
having us.
Thank you so much.
GovLove is produced by a rotating cast of ELGL volunteers. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. You can reach GovLove on Twitter at GovLovePodcast. And a reminder that I hope to see you at the Code for America Summit coming up in May. Head over to codeforamerica.org and use the promo code GovLove for 10% off your ticket for this once-a-year event. This year hosted in Washington, D.C., and featuring more great sessions just like this episode. Thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government. It ain't hard to tell.
Salute up, parties I shoot up, knives I analyze, drop a jewel, inhale from the L, school of full well, you feel it like Grail, it ain't hard to tell, I kick a skill like Shaquille holds a pill, vocabulary spills, I'm ill, plus